They called it a training exercise. The official paperwork described it as a routine multinational field assessment, buried in the kind of bureaucratic language that nobody outside a government filing cabinet was ever supposed to read. But the men who lived through it, the ones who spent 48 hours crawling through dense scrub in the searing Northern Territory heat, outwitting, outrunning, and outfighting some of the most battle-hardened warriors on the planet, they had a different name for it. They called it the moment everything changed. The year was 2019. The location was a remote stretch of terrain so unforgiving it has chewed up experienced soldiers and spat them back out since the Second World War. The participants were two of the most respected fighting forces in the Western world. On one side stood a company of United States Marines, lean, lethal, trained on discipline and overwhelming firepower, heir to a combat legacy stretching from the beaches of Iwo Jima to the mountains of Helmand. On the other side stood a smaller group, quieter, less celebrated in the headlines. Australia's 2nd Commando Regiment, Special Operations Command. The people, those in the know, simply called the Commandos. What was about to unfold over the next 2 days would be documented, analyzed, quietly discussed in defense circles, and then largely kept from public view. Until now, because what these two elite groups discovered about each other and about themselves would go on to reshape joint military doctrine, redefine how modern special forces train together, and prove beyond any reasonable doubt that the future of warfare does not belong to the biggest army. It belongs to the smartest one. Stay with this story, because by the end, you will understand exactly why. The next time there is a conflict that matters, the phone call America makes will go to Canberra. To understand what happened, you first have to understand who is standing on that red dirt. The United States Marine Corps is not just an army, it is an institution. Formed in 1775, the Marines have been deployed to every major American conflict in the nation's history and have cultivated a reputation as the world's finest expeditionary fighting force. Fast-moving, amphibious, and psychologically conditioned to operate in the most adverse conditions imaginable. Their training alone is designed to break most people. The ones who pass are, by any reasonable definition, exceptional human beings. The company brought to Australia for this exercise was drawn from the 3rd Marine Regiment, based out of Hawaii, which routinely operates across the Indo-Pacific as part of America's forward-deployed force posture. These were not administrative Marines. These were infantrymen with combat rotations, with the kind of institutional knowledge that only comes from doing real work in real places. They arrived in Australia confident, and with good reason. Nobody had given them any particular reason not to be. Australia's 2nd Commando Regiment, on the other hand, is a name that most people outside defense and intelligence circles have barely heard. Based in Sydney and operating under the broader framework of the Australian Special Operations Command, the regiment traces its lineage back to the Z Special Unit of the Second World War, a group of operatives so effective at behind enemy line sabotage that Japanese commanders placed dedicated bounties on their heads. In the modern era, the 2nd Commando Regiment represents Australia's primary special operations infantry capability. Its members deploy globally, working alongside SAS elements in Afghanistan, Iraq, and the Philippines, and their selection and training pipeline is regarded by allied nations as one of the most demanding in the world. The two units had exercised together before in a general sense, but this particular event, formerly classified as a Combined Arms Integration Assessment, was different in scope and intensity. The Australians had proposed a format. The Americans had agreed, and the terrain, the rules, and the objectives have been structured in a way that would give neither side an obvious home advantage. What it would give them was clarity. Raw, unambiguous, sometimes uncomfortable clarity. The Northern Territory of Australia is not a place that cares about your credentials. It does not care whether you have letters after your name, or how many combat deployments are listed on your service record, or how many press-ups you can do before breakfast. The land here operates on its own logic. Ancient, indifferent, and brutally efficient at exposing weakness. The exercise zone covered an area of roughly 200 square kilometers of mixed savanna and dense bushland near Bradshaw Field Training Area, one of Australia's largest and most isolated military training grounds, located in the remote Victoria River District. Temperatures during the assessment reached 42 degrees Celsius in the shade. There was no shade. The scrub, a dense tangle of Spinifex grass, pandanus palms, and paper barks, reduced visibility to as little as 10 meters in some areas, turning movement into a calculated crawl. Water sources were carefully rationed and monitored. Navigation technology was deliberately restricted to force reliance on traditional map reading and terrain interpretation. The wildlife alone presented a daily hazard. King brown snakes, saltwater crocodiles in the river systems, feral pigs, and the kind of insects that treat military-grade repellent as a mild inconvenience. For the American contingent, the environment was deeply unfamiliar. Hawaii-based Marines train extensively in jungle terrain, but the Australian outback presents a completely different sensory and navigation challenge. The absence of landmarks, the similarity of the vegetation across vast distances, and the way the heat distorts perception and judgment are things that no amount of academic preparation can fully anticipate. The Australians, many of whom had trained in this specific type of environment since early in their careers, felt at home, not comfortable. The bush does not offer comfort, but at home in a way that a craftsman is at home in a workshop full of dangerous tools. The exercise began at 0500 hours on a Tuesday. Both units were inserted by separate helicopter flights into the designated exercise area, given their mission parameters, and cut loose. There was no joint briefing, no handshake, no collaborative planning session. The point was separation, to allow each unit to operate according to its own training, instincts, and doctrine, and to see what happened when they came into conflict. The objective for the Marines was to secure a series of simulated infrastructure nodes spread across the terrain, establish a defendable forward operating perimeter, and maintain radio communications back to a simulated rear command element. The objective for the Australian commandos was to locate, fix, and neutralize, in exercise terms, those same nodes before they could be secured, disrupt the Marine communications network, and do all of this while remaining undetected for as long as possible. In essence, the Marines were defending, the commandos were hunting. The first contact came at 0843 hours. A three-man Marine fire team, moving through a dry creek bed toward their first objective, was hit by a simulated ambush from a two-man Australian element position on the high ground above them. The contact was so brief, less than 90 seconds from first shot to extraction, that by the time the Marine team had reorganized and moved to flank, the Australians were gone, absorbed back into the scrub like they had never existed. The Marines had been operating for 3 hours and 43 minutes. They had already lost 2 simulated kills. Over the next 6 hours, the pattern repeated itself. The Australian commandos were using the terrain in a way the Marines had not fully anticipated. Not as an obstacle to move through, but as a weapon to wield. They moved in pairs and small trios, communicated through prearranged signals rather than radio, and exploited the heat of the day to move when the Marines were at their lowest physiological state. By 1600 hours on day 1, the Australian element had disrupted 4 of the 7 Marine positions and had themselves suffered 0 confirmed simulated casualties. The Americans, to their considerable credit, adapted, but adapting takes time, and time, in a contested environment, is not free. To understand why the Australian performance in that first day was so dominant, you have to understand something about how Australia trains its Special Operations Forces. The 2nd Commando Regiment selection process is, by design, an extended exercise in psychological erosion. Unlike some Allied selection courses, which concentrate their hardest elements into a defined peak event, the Australian Commando pipeline is constructed to be cumulatively exhausting, to ensure that every man who passes has not just survived hardship, but learned to perform at a high level while buried in it. More specifically, the training places enormous emphasis on what instructors call small team autonomy. The doctrine holds that a commando element of 2, 3, or 4 men must be capable of planning, executing, and adapting a mission without reference to higher command. Because in the real world, communications fail, circumstances change, and the ability to make the right call in isolation is what separates a trained operator from a well-equipped civilian. This philosophy shapes everything: the exercises, the assessments, the debrief culture, even the way leadership within a regiment is selected and evaluated. The Marine Corps, for all its formidable capability, operates on a doctrine that tends to prioritize unit cohesion, communications integrity, and the application of concentrated force. These are not weaknesses. They are deliberate strategic choices that reflect the Marine Corps' primary role as an expeditionary assault force. But in a low-signature, small unit, terrain-dependent environment like the one set up in Bradshaw, those strengths became secondary to different qualities: patience, environmental fluency, improvisation, silence. The commandos had those qualities in abundance. But the most important observer in the exercise, perhaps more important than either commanding officer, was a combined lessons learned team that had been embedded with both units since the beginning. Because the point was never to prove that one force was superior to the other. The point was to find out what each could learn from the other. And on day 1, the ledger was heavily weighted in one direction. Nobody gives American Marines enough credit for their capacity to learn. That is a mistake. The Marine Corps did not build its reputation on stubbornness. It built it on the ability to take a bad situation, absorb a lesson, and come back harder. Day 1 had been a difficult lesson. Day 2 would be a demonstration of what genuine military professionals do with difficult lessons. Overnight, the Marine Company commander, a major with 2 Afghan deployments and a calm, analytical mind, pulled his element leaders into an impromptu debrief session. No PowerPoint, no formal report, just men sitting in the dark on body armor and camp rolls, dissecting what had gone wrong and what they were going to do about it. The conclusion was stark. They had been moving like Marines, in Marine terrain, and this was not Marine terrain. It was Australian terrain. They needed to start moving like the ground demanded. The Marine response on day 2 was a restructure. They broke their company into smaller elements, moving from platoon-level formations to section and even fire-team-level independence. They reduced their radio traffic dramatically, accepting the communications risk in exchange for a smaller electromagnetic signature, and they began using the terrain rather than fighting through it, identifying choke points, high ground, and natural observation posts in ways they had understood theoretically but not yet applied with genuine conviction. The results were immediate. By 0930 hours on day 2, the Marines had successfully ambushed an Australian pair attempting to reposition between 2 objectives. By 1100 hours, they had established a counter-surveillance screen on the approaches to their most critical remaining infrastructure node that the commandos simply could not penetrate without revealing themselves. The game had changed, and both sides felt it. The moment that defense analysts would later identify as the turning point came at 1,347 hours on the second day. An Australian commando pair, attempting to use a dry riverbed as concealed approach route toward the final Marine position, found themselves outmaneuvered by a 4-man Marine element that had, with remarkable patience, spent 3 hours building a camouflaged observation post in a stand of paper bark trees 40 meters from the riverbank. The Australians walked into a perfect simulated kill zone. What made the moment extraordinary was not the tactical outcome. It was a technique. The Marine element had used an Australian fieldcraft method, specifically a vegetation camouflage construction approach derived from the very doctrine manual that had been quietly shared between the 2 forces at the beginning of the exercise. They had read it in transit. They had applied it that morning, and it had worked. When the exercise concluded at 1800 hours and both units came together for the combined debrief, the atmosphere was something that did not fit neatly into the category of either victory or defeat. It was mutual respect at a depth that only comes from genuine challenge. The Australian commanding officer stated in the debrief that the Marine adaptation on day 2 had exceeded what his element had anticipated by a significant margin. The Marine major, for his part, was characteristically direct. He said his men had been humbled on day 1 and had responded the way Marines are supposed to respond, by getting better. The joint debrief lasted 4 hours. Every element leader from both forces contributed, and from that 4 hours of honest, specific, technically rigorous conversation emerged a set of recommendations that would later be formally incorporated into both nations' joint training frameworks under the Osman Defense Cooperation Agreement. The exercise had begun as a competition. It ended as a collaboration, and the collaboration produced outcomes that neither force could have reached alone. The 2019 Bradshaw exercise did not exist in a vacuum. It was part of a broader, deepening military partnership between Australia and the United States that had been accelerating steadily since the early 2000s, and which received significant new impetus with the announcement of the AUKUS partnership in September 2021, a trilateral security arrangement between Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States that committed, among other things, to the deepest integration of special operations capabilities in the alliance's history. Understanding why America values this relationship so deeply requires understanding Australia's strategic position. The continent sits at the gateway to the Indo-Pacific, the most contested and consequential strategic theater of the 21st century. It offers geography that the United States cannot replicate from Guam, Hawaii, or Japan, depth, distance from adversary reach, and access to sea lanes and airspace that are critical to any credible regional deterrence posture. But geography alone does not explain the relationship. What explains it is capability. Australia's Special Operations Forces have, over the past 2 decades, built a reputation that stands independent of the country's relatively modest overall military size. Australian SAS and commando elements served alongside American counterparts in virtually every major special operations mission of the post-September 11 era, earning respect that, in military circles, carries far more weight than press releases or political statements. Operators know operators. And the Americans who worked alongside Australians in the Corongo Valley and Helmand in the Philippines came away from those experiences with a very specific and very high assessment of what Australian forces could do. The Bradshaw exercise was, in this context, not an anomaly. It was a data point in a long trend, a trend that pointed consistently toward the conclusion that Australia punches well above its weight and that the weight is growing. Australia's defense budget has risen significantly across the past decade, driven by a strategic environment that no longer offers the comfortable assumptions of the post-Cold War period. New platforms, new capabilities, new investment in cyberspace, and undersea warfare are transforming what Australia brings to any coalition partnership. The Marines who flew back to Hawaii after Bradshaw knew they had been tested. They also knew they had found something valuable. An ally who fights like a partner, thinks like a strategist, and learns like an operator. Military documentaries often make the mistake of treating soldiers as categories rather than people. The Marines who came to Bradshaw had families waiting at home in Hawaii. They had hobbies, routines, and side jokes, and a specific camaraderie that forms between people who have trusted each other. The formal outcomes of the Bradshaw assessment were not published in any newspaper. They were circulated within the relevant staff channels of both nations' special operations commands, subjected to the standard review process, and eventually incorporated into joint training standards under Pacific Vanguard and Talisman Sabre exercise frameworks. But the informal lessons, the ones carried in the heads and habits of the men who were there, spread faster and reached further than any official document. For the Americans, the primary takeaway was the value of environmental adaptation. The exercise reinforced a lesson that the Marine Corps leadership had been wrestling with in the context of the Pacific pivot, namely, that the dominant terrain of any future Indo-Pacific conflict is not the urban sprawl of the Middle East, but the jungle and coastline of island Southeast Asia, and that operating effectively in that environment requires a different kind of physical and cognitive preparation than the Corps had prioritized in the previous 2 decades of counterinsurgency. Operations. For the Australians, the lesson was about scale and integration. Australian Special Operations Forces are, relative to their American counterparts, small. Their ability to operate independently at the small team level is outstanding, but operating as part of a large coalition, synchronizing with forces that operate on a different communications architecture, a different command rhythm, and a different set of cultural assumptions, is a different skill set. The exercise exposed areas where Australian doctrine could be refined to operate more fluidly inside larger ally frameworks. Those refinements were made. The broader lesson, the one that sits above both of those specific takeaways, is the one that military leaders have been trying to communicate to policymakers for years. The most effective alliances are not the ones built on shared history or diplomatic agreements. They are the ones built on shared sweat, shared hardship, and the specific kind of knowledge that comes from having genuinely tested each other. Australia and the United States have been testing each other in the field for decades. What happened at Bradshaw was not a surprise to those who have been paying attention. It was confirmation. In the months and years that followed the Bradshaw exercise, the relationship between Australian and American Special Operations Forces deepened in ways that are visible even outside observers. The Marine Rotational Force Darwin, an annual deployment of U.S. Marines to Australia's Northern Territory that had begun in 2012, was expanded significantly, growing from an initial rotation of 250 Marines to a full force of 2,500. With associated air assets and combined training programs that drew directly on the lessons captured during exercises like Bradshaw. The AUKUS announcement of September 2021 formalized what had been building on the ground for years. The agreement committed to the transfer of nuclear-powered submarine technology to Australia, a decision of historic proportions that reflected the depth of trust between the 2 nations at the highest levels of government and defense, but also committed to far-reaching integration of advanced military capabilities, including cyber, artificial intelligence, quantum technologies, and, critically, special operations forces. The 3 nations agreed to establish a Special Operations Forces cooperation framework that would see Australian, British, and American operators training together, deploying together, and developing doctrine together at an unprecedented level. For the men who had crawled through the spine effects of Bradshaw in 2019, none of this came as a surprise. They had already lived a version of it that mattered most, the human version, stripped of politics and ceremony, reduced to the basic truth of what 2 groups of professional warriors could achieve when they brought their best to the same piece of ground and refused to pretend that the result was anything other than what it was. You might be wondering why any of this matters if you're not a soldier, not a defense policy analyst, not a geopolitical strategist. Here is why it matters. The world we live in is not governed by the loudest voice or the biggest flag. It is governed by the relationships, the capabilities, and the collective will of nations that have made the hard choices to invest in their own security and in the security of their partners. Australia's decision to build and maintain a world-class special operations capability, to put money and talent and national commitment behind organizations like the 2nd Commando Regiment and the SAS, is not an abstract policy decision. It is a concrete expression of what kind of nation Australia wants to be in a world that is becoming more contested, not less. The exercise at Bradshaw attested that decision, and the decision passed. Not with an easy grade, not without challenges, not without moments of genuine difficulty and even failure, but it passed in a way that matters most. In the field, against genuinely capable opponents, under conditions that did not allow for comfortable interpretation of the results. Australia showed up, Australia competed, Australia learned, and Australia changed things. The next time there's a crisis in the Indo-Pacific, and history strongly suggests there will be one, the countries that navigate it most effectively will be the ones that have spent the years before not just talking about alliance and partnership, but actually doing the hard, unglamorous, sometimes invisible work of building them in a dry riverbed in the Northern Territory. In the searing heat of an Australian summer, two groups of soldiers from opposite sides of the Pacific did some of that work, and nobody who was there has forgotten it. If this story hit different for you, if it made you think about what it actually takes to build something that works, not just something that looks good on paper, then we want to know about it. Drop a comment below. Tell us what surprised you most. Tell us what you already knew. Tell us which side you would have wanted to be on, and why. The comment section on this channel is one of the best conversations on the internet when it comes to this kind of content, and it stays that way because of the people who show up and contribute. If you are new here, the subscribe button is right below this video. One click. No algorithm games, no clickbait cycles, just stories like this one, told properly with the respect they deserve. We put serious time into every single production on this channel, and the community that is built up around it is something we are genuinely proud of. And if you want to go deeper on the AUKUS partnership on Australian Special Operations history, or on how modern military alliances are being reshaped by the Indo-Pacific strategic environment, the next video in this series is already on screen. It picks up exactly where this one leaves off. We will see you there.